Welcome to Morlock Me, the weekly podcast where we discuss books and their cinematic adaptations. My name's Charlie.
And I'm Michael, hello.
And this week, I'm very excited this week. I think you can already tell I'm excited. This week we're discussing one of the greatest feats of literature ever to be written, which is, of course, J.R.R Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings series. And this episode we'll be discussing the Fellowship of the Rings. If you can hear an ice cream van singing in the background, I'm really sorry about that. We're recording at home today. Yes, the Fellowship of the Ring. I'm really excited because I love Lord of the Rings. I think it's amazing. I think it stood the test of time. And then Peter Jackson just came along and made 3 amazing films. Yes, they're long, and yes, they're very, very dull if you're not into that kind of thing. But for me, I love it. Like, I'm obsessed with them. I've got all 3 books. I've got The Hobbit. I've got like more editions, but like with pretty covers. I wear a ring that's actually a tree, which is the White Tree of Gondor. I'm obsessed. Like, I'm already like trying to just think of trying to get a Middle-earth dress. Like, that's how mad I am on it. I think they're amazing. This is going to be really tough for me. Because how am I going to choose, like, the book or the film? Like, this is going to be really tough for me. I'm just.
This is all about you.
Yeah, I'm just having, because I always just throw the microphone over to you. Where I'm like, no, this is Lord of the Rings. I have to talk about it. But yeah, so we're talking about the Fellowship of the Ring, which is, for people who don't know, is the first one, and obviously its cinematic counterpart by Peter Jackson. I love it. I like there are differences which we've discussed, and there's elements to it which are either over exaggerated or that Peter Jackson's done for cinematic effect, which is like which you would do in a film. But I think overall they're fantastic and I love them. And I'm going to pass it over to you because I've talked way too much about how much I love them and we haven't even started discussing or analysing it yet. So I think I'm already going to be biased to this. But in like a confusing way where I'll be like, what shall I choose, the film or the book? I don't know. So I have to think about this.
2.5 minutes. 2.5 minutes before you pass me the microphone. Hi, everyone. Yeah, Charlie is a massive Lord of the Rings nerd. If you didn't realise that, you know that now. I am one of those awful people who is a fantasy geek. I love sci-fi, I love fantasy, who'd never read The Lord of the Rings. I've seen the films, really like the films. They are a bit long, but never read it, never really been bothered. Tried to read the Silmarillion when I was 11. That was a mistake.
That's really difficult though, like, because it's a culmination of stories, and then like. And it's not even because it was edited by Christopher Tolkien, his son. So it's like it's not even as if it's kind of been done in that way. It's kind of been edited in that way. So it's really difficult because I've got like I can already see on my bookshelf the unfinished tales. I've got all of those. I think the Hobbit's hanging around somewhere. But I'll pass it back to you because I'm just talking.
But yeah, so trying to read the Silmarillion when I was so young because the films were out and everybody had taken Lord of the Rings out of the library, so I tried to read that and just did not get on with it because my brain couldn't deal with it. So this has been a really interesting experience, actually, reading Fellowship of the Ring and rewatching the film, because obviously I've seen the films before, and seeing what the differences are, because obviously I've done it wrong. Basically I've done it the wrong way around, and yeah, there are quite a lot of differences, and some of them work and some of them don't, as always. But I think Peter Jackson tried to be incredibly faithful, as much as he possibly could, to the books, because otherwise I don't think they would have got made, because the Tolkien estate is notorious for being sticklers. They didn't really want the films to be made in the first place. And then
Can we just say thank you to the Tolkien estate for allowing them to be made, because I'm so happy they were made.
Yes, it's extraordinarily generous of them to make so much money from these films that they didn't want made.
Oh my goodness.
But no, and I think it's very interesting what Peter Jackson decided to take out, particularly when you look at the Hobbit films, because of how much he decided to keep in. And there's stuff, having read the book, there's stuff that I didn't notice that the film kept in. So there's particular stuff about certain scenes where they keep elements that they don't remark upon. So skipping ahead a little bit, but it's when they've met up with Aragorn and they're going through the forest towards Weathertop, and they pause near 3 stone trolls. I did not notice that the first time that I watched the film at all. It's in the book. It's where a scene from The Hobbit takes place, and it's not remarked upon in the film, and it's brilliantly clever because it's not remarked upon in the film. It is there for the sticklers. It's there for the people like us who nitpick everything, and it's just one of those. It's where I think the fan service comes in, and it's where, with these kind of films, I think Peter Jackson is one of the very first to sort of introduce that degree of fan service.
Yeah.
And
it's kind of what it's kind of been followed up in the sort of sense of the sci-fi universe of what J.J. Abrams did for Star Wars and for Star Trek in the sense of the first ones, because he stayed true to what it was and also to sort of what the fans want, and also because there is literature to it, but it's for the films in any sense. With like Star Trek and stuff like that, which is like a TV show, and then there were films off it. It's kind of recreating the essence, the like William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy sort of days of like how what that storyline was, and I think that's what he's done for the Lord of the Rings. That's why it's so long, is because because it's 3 substantial books, and they're not thin, but they're not like tomes. They're good sizes, but there is so much in them that you understand. Like only anyone who hasn't read them doesn't understand why they're 3 hours long, and why like the special cuts are like 5 hours long, and you're like, what? Why do you need a film that's 5 hours long? But it's when people who've read the entire series and maybe the Silmarillion and the Hobbit, you understand why they're so long, and that why things have been cut out and things that haven't been done. So to anyone that's maybe watched them before, watch them again, and then you understand what we're all talking about. Sorry, I've interrupted you. I'm getting too excited already.
Calm down.
Sorry.
Calm down. We'll get there. It's fine. Okay. But no, I think, and it's interesting what elements Peter Jackson brings to it, because there are a couple that he brings to it that aren't in the book as much. So particularly with Merry and Pippin, in the film, particularly Fellowship of the Ring, they are morons. Yes. And they are not in the book. They have their comic moments, but it starts almost immediately in the film at Bilbo's birthday party, where they just steal the firework and nearly blow themselves up, and then Pippin knocks a skeleton down a well in Moria and alerts the goblins in Moria that there are people there, and there's more slapstick, so people fall over. Frodo falls over a lot.
Frodo just is. I have a problem with Frodo. Like I just I understand what you mean, but because obviously they're hobbits, and it's like they're not going to be like these ardent warriors that are coming into it.
That's the entire point of the Hobbit character. They are the everyman. Yeah,
which is and that can be done like in the Hobbit. It's done well because as much as Bilbo doesn't know what he's getting to, and is like oh, I can't my mother's doilies and all stuff like this, and you're like but he learns to grow from that quite quickly. Whereas the problem with Merry and Pippin in the books, they have their sort of immature side. And they sort of have their like, we don't really know, like what about our food, and because it's the first time they've ever been out of the Shire, and it's like it's a whole new world. And but they do learn, and they sort of learn to like listen to people like Aragorn, and and they look up to him, and they listen to people like Gimli, and they listen to Legolas, and they obviously absolutely listen to Gandalf. Whereas in the films, which I found quite annoying, was the fact that they were so immature pretty much until probably the end of the second film, going into the third film, which I felt annoying because you would have thought that they would have learned by then. I do understand, however, that probably Peter Jackson, this is just me speculating, but Peter Jackson probably wanted to see the element of maybe the age, and like maybe that it's like seen as they're kind of like the youth, and that they're growing, and that they're learning, and that they're adapting. And whereas like Aragorn is kind of the wise old, as much as it's kind of like the element of what was really, it was quite sweet and how it was described to me by I was like, I can't remember, it was in a book or something, but it's like if you think of them in the sense of like trees, that like the hobbits are like saplings where they're just sprouting out, and they're sort of looking where to go, and then there's like Aragorn, who's sort of like, he's a great tree who's like maybe not like an oak or something, but maybe like a birch or something, so he stands true and strong, but he's still got a way to grow. And then you think of Gandalf as like an old oak who's grown tall and strong, you know, but is still loved and adored. Like, it's one of those things. And I love that kind of thing because it is very Tolkienist, where you think of the trees and it's like, you know, and there's so much elements to it. And I thought that was really lovely. And I think probably that's what Peter Jackson's tried to do, in the sense of showing the immaturity and sort of the wise and sort of maybe the irrational and maybe the old in all the characters. Because obviously Gimli's very hot-headed at first, you know, and he's very like, you know, oh, you know, and he doesn't want to listen to working with Legolas, and he's like, you know, and he sort of, he doesn't really like being maybe pushed around by, you know, Aragorn. Like, I think maybe he'll obviously listen to Gandalf because he's a wizard, he's wise, he's old, he's been around for, you know, generations. Whereas I think the idea of, you know, a dwarf being sort of like shoved around by like a man or even an elf is like, he can't stand it, you know, and stuff like this. And so it's like it's all these different sort of personalities you're introduced to, which, you know, you understand, and you sort of it's well done in the films, but it's like you kind of have to read the books to get it. But I do think Peter Jackson sort of made it a bit too like, yes, okay, there's the comic relief and there's they're immature for Merry and Pippin, but then it's like, yeah, but they're still immature, and it's like, cut it out now, like, stop it, because they're not like that in the books.
No, because Merry works out about the ring fairly quickly in the books. He basically goes, oh yeah, this is what's going on, and you. So
it shows that as much as they're smart and they're naive, much as they're sort of a bit immature and naive, they're still quite smart.
Yes, yeah, definitely, because then stupidity and naivety are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's interesting as well because the way that Gandalf is introduced is different. Frodo is introduced differently in that he is the one who sort of bumps into Gandalf on the road or like chases through, whereas in the book there are children chasing the cart because it's Gandalf, and you know they're all excited.
And he goes to wait for it.
Yeah,
so,
and Bilbo's birthday party is, you know, it's very good in the book. He does the same trick in the film as he does in the book, and but then in the book the action kind of pauses for a bit, and it does that a few times, and we will get to Tom Bombadil. Oh my god,
it's very stop-starty. Like the problem with it, like it, because there's elements which can be read as if it was written a week ago, and there's elements that are read when you know when it's been written in, like, you know, the early part of the 20th century, where it is, you know, like going into the genealogy of the Baggins, you know, which it kind of happens in The Hobbit, but it's not as long. Like there's like nearly four chapters where it's literally just about the genealogy, and you're like, oh, okay, please stop now. Like, I get it. I don't want to know about the Tooks or like the Baggins or like
or the Sackville Bagginses.
Oh yeah, I don't want to know about them. You know, but it's like that's the element where it starts is it likes to go into the background of it, which I get, and it's good to have in a book, because sometimes there are times where you never hear about someone's heritage, but it's done too much in the book, and I think that's what makes it a book that people go, maybe I couldn't read it, was too difficult, because you read the first two chapters and it's pretty much going on in the background of Bilbo and Frodo, and you're like, oh, like this is not what the film's like. Like the film kind of goes straight into it.
Yeah.
You know, there's a bit, you know, we hear about like, you know, Belladonna Took and stuff like this, and like, you know, and you know, and all the Baggins and the Sackville Bagginses and stuff like this, and Bilbo, but it's very quick and it's kind of done very, very briefly. Whereas the fact that they go on so long, that's what makes people not like reading it, and I think maybe what puts people off reading it, because it's not as fluid as I think the films are, because that's the problem, is because with books it's all written down, so you have to create the imagery and you have to create the story, whereas the film, it's kind of, you just have to sit back and watch. The problem with the genealogy is it is too immersive, but saying that, the way in which he describes his Bilbo's birthday is stunning, and then you see it in film and you go, that's exactly what I read. That's exactly how it was perfect. So I do give, you know, it's hard to sort of like, you know, have a go at the book and the film, because they're both, it's very difficult. I'm getting very confused now. I don't know, but yeah, I just think that's what makes it stop-starty, is going into the backgrounds of like either new characters or like new areas, like, you know, and stuff like that. So like going into Rivendell, you have to hear the back history of that.
Yeah.
So, and you have to hear the back history of, you know, the Mines of Moria and all stuff like that. So it's difficult to keep up with it, but I still think it's fantastic.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how the film starts as well, because it gives us that little bit of prologue about the rings. And it also has a weird opening line, because Galadriel says, "For none now live who remember." And you sort of go, well, you were alive, weren't you? And Elrond wasn't he? Because he was at the battle. So, and you have one of the rings, so clearly you were alive. So what are you talking about, Galadriel? It's a lovely line, but it makes no sense.
Yeah, I think if they deviated it to be something like, you know, not all.
Yeah. Some few now live who remember. You know.
But yeah, it's. I think stuff like that is there's strange continuity errors where it's just like, I think only if you're really nitpicking you pick up on it like we do, because it's like, you know, there are elements where you see it and you go, nah, that didn't happen, or nah, you're wrong there. So, but you know, it's one of those things. But it's, again, it's like with anything, like we were talking about last week with the Star Wars films. It's a big project.
Yeah.
Like maybe at the time, like when when we found out the Lord of the Rings was coming out, it's you know, it's one of those that maybe it's a big feat for people who've read the books, but I think not a lot of people will maybe have read the books or maybe knew what it might have heard of it and gone, oh yeah, I know of Lord of the Rings, and you know, blah blah blah. So I think when they made The Hobbit, it's kind of like we sort of knew again what to expect, and like, wow, that's a big role to do because there's dragons in that one and stuff like that. So I think with the especially the first, the Fellowship, it's like it's one of those where you really do get the sense that they're going on an adventure, and I think, you know, it's not as but it's like a thing, it's like it's not a sprightly adventure, it's a big heavy sort of burden. The problem is with like the book, I feel that they do try to make it like it's a very noble quest, and like they big it up a lot, and they're kind of like, you know, like you're very, you know, to Frodo, like you're very brave, and like Gandalf's like, you know, he builds it to be like it's going to be really dangerous, like, which they do in the film as well, but they kind of sort of make it as kind of like, oh, you know, well, it's a really serious, like there's no like sense of the nobility in what he's doing, because at the end of the day he's a hobbit from Hobbiton that's never strayed out of the Shire, and he's suddenly going to you know, the fires of Mount Doom to get rid of this ring, and you're like, wow, that's massive, you know, like you would expect, you know, Gandalf to be kind of really, you know, but in the books, which I don't know if you found, I find Gandalf is a lot sterner than Ian McKellen's portrayal in the film.
Yes, yeah, he is. I mean, and he's interesting as well. He's dismissive of certain characters, and he's a bit more, he's stern. He is, and I think Sir Ian McKellen always, even with characters that are horrible, he always brings a little bit of a twinkle, just because he's Sir Ian McKellen. And the way he's introduced in this film, you know, he laughs, and he's laughing along with Frodo, and then the sternness comes in when Frodo offers him the ring, and he sort of says, don't tempt me, Frodo. You know, it's there's perhaps the characters, and I hate to say this, but perhaps the characters have more facets to them in the film, particularly, and it's difficult, particularly with Frodo, because he's the everyman character, and it's the idea that only somebody as insignificant, in inverted commas, as a hobbit could carry this burden, because the powerful can't carry it because it would corrupt them. An elf couldn't carry it because it corrupt, you know, all this sort of stuff. And you know, as we learn in the Fellowship of the Ring, at least in Peter Jackson's universe, orcs and Uruk-hai are corrupted elves. Saruman says this, which isn't in the book as far as I'm aware. It's not in the Lord of the Rings anyway. It might be in the appendices or in the Silmarillion somewhere. But so the idea that the only person who can carry it is a hobbit, and obviously we know what happens to Gollum, and Gollum was hobbit-like when he was Smeagol. But the idea that if they are corrupted, they can't really threaten anyone is a really interesting idea. It's quite an unusual take on the everyman, in the sense that it's, yes, you must be the hero, but actually, if it corrupts you, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, like I saw it as like, again, with the sort of the idea of, you know, the characters of the, essentially the my brain's just gone absolutely dead then. The characters of the hobbits, that they're basically, like very youthful, and they're the naivety and the innocence of the world essentially, and then all the other characters sort of, like represent like war and wisdom and age and stealth really, and like sort of adventure. It's kind of the whole idea of Frodo's corruption over the ring as time goes on, but like a lot in the Fellowship, because he does start to feel it throughout the Fellowship, especially like when they get to Rivendell and they sort of see Bilbo again, and he sort of sees what he's become, like what the ring has essentially done to him. In the book and in the film, like it's done a bit more in the book, but they do have a whole scene on it. But it's kind of that sense of going out into the big wide world is having an effect on him. So it's kind of that literal sense of like the naivety is still there, but like maybe the sort of sense of like, oh, everything's gonna be fine is suddenly slipping away, and it's like, okay, we're on a big adventure here, which I think is good, because it's that idea of you go on an adventure, or you're going on a quest, and it does change you, because you're experiencing new lands, meeting new people, and doing things you never really anticipated doing before. But I think, in a sense of the Peter Jackson world, I think he's done a really good job. Like I think he's been very true. There's obviously elements that have been sort of made to be a bit more exaggerated. But I think, like, well, you were saying earlier when we were discussing, discussing before we started recording this, that the descriptions of a lot of places are stunning. Like I remember you talking about the description of Rivendell was stunning.
Yeah, and particularly Lothlorien in the book, it's described beautifully as sort of a sea of stars across a hill. And I don't feel like, at least in my head, the Lothlorien of the film isn't the same.
No, I think that's because that's the problem with I felt there was a problem is you've got such imagery with the books, so that you could easily do it, and he's done it with a lot of things like Rivendell. Like, I felt Rivendell was like stunning, and I felt there were differences, but I felt that is what I was reading, and I felt that was really good. But with the Lothlorien, I just felt that really let it down, because it was so stunning, and it's it's one of those parts in the book that you just go, wow, that's really great, and it felt it let down a lot in the book. But I suppose it could be they just didn't have enough money. I don't know. They spent a lot of it on it. But
I think it's interesting, because the reason that I was disappointed with the Lothlorien in the film is because it is too like Rivendell, and I know they're both elvish settlements, but they're presented very differently in the book. They're different types of elves,
Well, not because it's like with the I'm jumping not jumping universes, but I'm jumping around a bit here. But it's like in the Hobbit, it's like with the wood elves. That's
exactly.
nothing like Rivendell. So you would have expected that, because I think everyone will then think that all elves are the same. Where it's like, well, they're not. Like, there's differences, and there's the habitats and sort of their ways and their sort of cultures are all different, which is not really explained so much. It's kind of just, you just think that they're all related or something. So
and it's unclear in this whether Legolas is one of Lady Galadriel's elves, because they're both blonde, whereas in the Hobbit, obviously that's elaborated on, because you meet Legolas's father in the Hobbit and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I think there are a few interesting things, like when they go to Bree, for example. I'd imagine Bree as like a single street for some reason. And the fact
smaller than what it actually was.
In the film, and there are some clever bits in the film, like particularly with Bree, that are done differently. I mean, Pippin sort of drops Frodo in it rather than Frodo dropping himself in it, because Frodo starts showing off and dancing and then slips over and the ring falls on his finger then.
He loves to fall over.
There is he falls over so much. But and then there's a really good piece of filmmaking in when the Nazgul come to Bree and they're creeping up on the beds. In the book, you know that the hobbits aren't there. In the film, it presents it as if they are and they're asleep, and I really like that. It's a common filmmaking technique, but I actually really like it because it builds the tension differently. Whereas in the book, they're just watching from across the street, I think.
I think that's where like the magic of filmmaking comes in, because I think that's the great thing about films, is that it brings to life what you've read. And so I think, there is that suspense where you are like, they've only just started and they've been caught, and you're like, oh no, they've not. Oh, well done, Peter Jackson. And it's,
What Charlie's not telling you is that she says this out loud in cinemas.
Shh. But it's, like, I think the element of the trickery of filmmaking, that's when it comes in handy.
Yes.
And I think that's when it's, it's really good. And I think, because like with the Nazgul, I don't know, like I had an idea of what they would look like in my head, but when you saw them, I thought, wow, that's much more terrifying than I thought. But I like that, because they are supposed to be these terrifying sort of workers of Sauron, basically. But sort of having pictured Sauron and sort of seeing him in the film, you kind of go, yeah, okay, that is what I imagined. But which I think was done very well, like, because
the Sauron's eye is phenomenal.
Yeah,
it's really scary, and it's still, having watched the film again, it still holds up as a really, really good effect.
Yeah,
they've done really well with it. But one of the interesting things about Sauron's eye is that when Frodo slips into the ring world, and it's all sort of fake, we don't get that much description of what happens when he slips on the ring. He goes invisible, and things seem sort of more shaded-ish. But in the film, it does it as a sort of constantly running, distorted world, and then Sauron's eye sort of screams up to Frodo and actually talks to him. Whereas in the book, that doesn't happen. You get the sense that Sauron is watching for that, and that the ringwraiths can sense it. But the fact that Sauron actually speaks is really, really different from the film. From the book, that doesn't happen at all.
No, I think, because like what I thought was going to be a really interesting part of it is that at the end of the day, Sauron's killed at the beginning. Sauron's dead when this all starts, and Sauron's not around essentially through all of this. He's in Mordor, his eye is at Mordor, and that's it. But it's, what I think was amazing is this is essentially like one of the baddies in fiction, I suppose, where he's an unseen force that it terrifies people, like saying his name. It's kind of like the element of Voldemort with Harry Potter. Just saying his name is terrifying. We're saying Sauron, everyone would look round and be like, and they know that, and just this being, like, he's not doing anything. He's commanding the Nazgul. He's commanding the orcs and like the Uruk-hai and like essentially Saruman and stuff like that. And it's like, but he's not there. It's not like he is this great force, or he's this tall figure that goes around, who's sat in his castle. He's this invisible sort of enemy, and I think that's what's amazing about him as an enemy, or like as the baddie of the story, is because that he's not there. And it's like, and everyone's terrified of him. It's like his powers aren't up to, well, he's got no powers really.
No, I mean, he's split into pieces. That's why one of the and there's mention, I think later we'll get to that of in future episodes, of the mouth of Sauron and all. The idea that he is broken. Yeah,
and it's just like that, but he can cause even from where he is, like the corruption with the ring, and like, and to like when they do the thing in the film where like the eye flashes and it's the screaming noise. That's terrifying. And you're like, but he really can't do you any harm when you think about it. Like, he couldn't come out and kill you, but he's terrifying you to the sense that you're fearful.
It's an omnipresence. Is the device that they're using, and it's used really well, particularly in the film, because every time Frodo risks putting the ring on, Sauron sees him, and whispers to him, and says, "Bring me the ring," and all this sort of stuff. But and I think we are shown a lot more in the film. Whilst it cuts a lot of stuff out, it does go by the classic show don't tell rule. Like when Gandalf is indisposed, we know why. We know that it's Saruman. We know we're shown a dramatic wizard fight, which is awesome, between two old beardy men.
Hey, that's brilliant.
Yeah, I'm not knocking it. It's incredible. The fact that they're just consistently going around going, oh, it's amazing. It's one of the funniest scenes in cinema. But no, Charlie's slowly fuming.
It's just because it's two powerhouses of Christopher Lee and Sarah McKellen, so I can't speak bad of it.
And she's getting really annoyed that I'm insulting it. But this is mainly our dynamic. No, but yeah. So, and It's interesting, like, and there's a particular device that I noticed that I think comes from Peter Jackson's horror film roots.
Yeah.
Is that when the Nazgul leans down, when they're hiding under the tree branch, the roots, and he leans down, and you see insects sort of and worms crawl up from that's not mentioned in the books. That's not done, but it's a classic sign of corruption. It's the insect thing of like if something comes along and you see insects crawling out of it, and you're instantly like, oh God, no.
Yeah.
You know, it's that kind of thing, and that really I think is what Peter Jackson brings to it, is that extra little edge of cinematic flair that. And obviously the book couldn't have that because it's a book. Yeah. But it's just the little extra devices that he doesn't overuse them, but in the Lord of the Rings films at least. But it's that little extra thing, and it's the way that we have been taught that film speaks to us, and we go immediately, oh, that means that they're really, really evil. And it's the way that music works in film as well. It tells you how to feel, and the fact that that's there, I think is really interesting because what he takes away and what he brings in, I think he brings a lot more than he takes away. Would that be fair?
No, I do think that because he did do a fantastic job. Cause I remember seeing the first film, just being blown away and being like, this is amazing. Because I've read the books and I love the books. I've loved them for years. So I was like, well, it's like with anybody that has a favourite book or has read a book that they enjoyed and then find out it's being made into a film. It's a nervous process because you're like, are they going to be true to it? You know, are they going to include everything or are they going to cut things out? And he was very true to it, I felt. Yes, there's differences, like, you know, there's bits, like we were talking earlier about the Balrog of Morgoth. Yes. The Balrog in the film is this large, like, sort of fire and lava and shadow kind of demon, really.
It's almost like a bull demon.
Yeah, it's kind of like he's got, like, you know, the horns and he's got like a gaping sort of like mouth with sharp teeth, and it's stunningly done. Like, you would be terrified of it. And it's got this, you know, that whip and, you know, his tail, and you're like, Christ, you know, this is terrifying. But in the book, it's kind of like the description of it, you'd think it's kind of like a shadowy man, like maybe a bit, you know, I sort of had him as like maybe like 6-7 foot, so he's like quite tall and domineering, but it's kind of like it's very humanoid, like it's kind of it's scary. Probably to me it's probably more scary because it's like a man, but it's not of this world. It's
other,
which, you know, like it's sense like a necromancer or something like that, which which would be scary, and it would, you know, it would be I think that would have been much more interesting for the sort of a battle with Gandalf if it was sort of a man of sort of similar stature fighting it off, as opposed to this massive creature which could easily have killed them, which I found very annoying because it's like this massive sort of demon, and yet it's like they all managed to get out pretty much quite easily.
And Gandalf just sort of puts up a light shield, and obviously it goes poorly for Gandalf, but he still manages to sort of batter it off and like break the sword with like a tiny amount of magic.
Yeah, which I felt, if it had, you know, which I just felt that was what was, like, it looked visually stunning, and it would be absolutely. Like, you know, when
if you didn't have Cirion Mellenkellen in that part, it would not have worked.
Yeah, like, I think, you know, if you'd seen it and not read the book, you would have been like, wow, you know, it's amazing. But I think having read the book, you just kind of feel like, I just feel that's a massive mismatch, and like, if it's, you know, this demon's such a large being and stuff, it should have been able to get rid of all of them. Whereas, you know, if it was how it's described in the book as, like, you know, quite a human stature and quite, you know, a small being in the sense of a demon, that would have been more realistic. Like, it could have, like, you know, jumped around, you know, it could have, you know, in the sense of, like, you know, like, it could have vanished and then reappeared in one bit, and, you know, it would have made the fight with Gandalf a lot more realistic, you know, in the sense that it's, you know, he could have kept him off with his staff, and, you know, and he could have, you know, fought him with a sword. So that was one of the elements. As much as I loved it visually, it was stunning, I just felt it wasn't true to the book in that sense. So, you know, things like that I think should have been changed, because that would have made it a bit more, like, the continuity would have been right.
I agree with you. I think the Balrog, although, as you say, is visually stunning, doesn't quite make sense.
No.
Because then if Gandalf is able to push off a Balrog, what has he been doing with his magic whilst all those goblins are about?
Yeah.
And why can't he just shoot down all those birds?
He with power like that, he should be able to decimate pretty much all of the orcs and Uruk-hai and probably take on Sauron himself. But it's well, no. I know he's a powerful wizard, but he's not that powerful.
No. And the whole point, in later films and stuff, the magic is shown to take effort. And when he's fighting Saruman, it takes a lot out of them, to the point where he's bloodied and beaten by the end of it. And I think it does almost represent a plot hole that the Balrog is so huge and then is beaten by a tiny bridge and a tiny man. Now, moving on completely, apropos of nothing, can we please talk about Tom Bombadil? Because I hate that man. I don't know. I have no idea how you feel about him, but it's just the plot just stops. They go along, they find an old tree that tries to eat them, which is quite funny, particularly given the Ents later on, who they completely trust. And then Tom Bombadil happens along singing his happy song, and he's lovely and it's really nice. But why?
Yeah, it was one of those characters which you just come across and they've been through so much.
Yeah.
And and it's a real sort of. It's sort of it's that whole quest is a test on the Fellowship, because it's a test of strength, it's a test of heart, it's a test of soul, it's a test of sort of really can you do it, because it's going to be exhausting, not just for the getting there, but emotionally it's exhausting, because they do lose a lot of people. They all get separated at one point, well, at the end really, and it's they're, and also for the hobbits, it's for people like Aragorn, it's a sort of, it's kind of life really to go from one place to another. And again with dwarves, they know where their homeland is, and elves, it's the same, they know where they come from, they can get back to it. But for hobbits, it's they're leaving everything they know to go to it. So then suddenly to have Tom Bombadil turn up and be oh, I'm really, really happy, hey, sing, 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 you're I really this was a really weird,
it's a weird diversion. It's
really weird that he just sort of came into it, because he didn't really bring anything to the case. He just brought annoyance with him. And I just kind of feel that it was kind of it was one of those characters that either I don't know, maybe Tolkien felt that it was getting a bit too heavy and you needed to lighten up the atmosphere. But he was such a random character that it was there was no sort of flowing into it. It's not as if they'd saved him or rescued him, or he'd come out and save them.
Well, he did rescue them from the tree.
No, yeah, that's true, but it's not, it's kind of, it wasn't as if it was they've got to know him and he became this. He just sort of was he was.
Whereas with Strider, it's the other way around, particularly in the book, because they really, really don't trust him in the book.
Yeah.
And to the extent that they actually need a letter of proof from Gandalf. Yeah. Whereas in the film, that they just sort of go, oh, okay, you're trying to protect us, good, fine, and trust him immediately, which I suppose is Hobbit naivete. But yeah, Tom Bombadil, I just don't understand him, particularly as when they finally get to Rivendell and have the Council of Elrond and spend days discussing Gandalf's trials and tribulations, which
they really should have cut that down.
Thank God it's a 15 minute scene in the film. God, because Gandalf can talk in the book. He genuinely says at one point in the book, I've been rambling, so I will try to tie this up, and then goes on at the same pace as he was before. But no, and they ask the question, can Tom Bombadil protect the ring? Can we put it with him and keep it with him, and Sauron won't get to it because he looks after the forest? And Gandalf goes, no, he is of little consequence. And you go, yes, exactly, so why is he here?
Yeah, it's kind of, he's one of those characters which I just think he's probably because I love the literature of it, but I just do feel that he was one of those characters that was just to sort of fill, he was just kind of oh well, I need to get them from here to here, or I'll just put this character in. I kind of feel he was a bit of a filler character, and I don't think he was really. He's not one that's to be remembered really. He's just kind of one of those characters that's just kind of there.
Although some people love him.
Yeah, I know, but I just having read and seen the films and stuff like that, when you read again and then you read and you see this character, you're just why? Really, you're not bringing anything. You're there's just, it's not as if it, yes, okay, he does save them from the trees and stuff like that, but he's really not brought anything that it's not as if he's an exceptional character. He's kind of we've got the comic relief and sort of the trying to be upbeat characters of Sam and and of Frodo, because as much as Frodo, I find Frodo in the films and a lot in the books just kind of a really useless
he's a bit
character.
He's a bit of a nothing.
Yeah, and like, but at least he does try and rally the spirits, and he does try and keep them going. So you're like, well, he does have that on his side. But with Tom Bombadil, it's like he's just got nothing to it. Like he's just a nothing character. So I just feel that like it was a weird choice to put him in. But he's not he's not in the films from what I remember.
No, he's not at all.
So he doesn't even appear as like a bit character. So it's kind of like Peter Jackson must have just thought, yeah, there really is nothing to this character. So what is the point?
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's interesting. What other changes they choose, because they cut some characters, they keep some in. So when the hobbits are struggling away from the ring wraiths after Weathertop and Frodo's injured, and Arwen comes along and is introduced.
Lovely Arwen.
And is introduced way earlier than she is in the book, and is introduced as a warrior, which is completely different. She's barely in Fellowship of the Ring, the book.
I really wanted her, because in the book she is described as like very hands-on, and is like is a warrior. So then when she suddenly turns up and then she's all just basically just sits a bit mopey in a dress, I was like, I'm really disappointed what they did with her, because I felt she could have been a great female character, because they unfortunately they don't in the Lord of the Rings series, they don't have a lot of great, like Lady Galadriel is a fantastic character, but again she very rarely appears, as opposed to she appears a lot in the Fellowship, and she's kind of in and there in the books, in a bit, and in the films where she just appears a bit, or like is remembered in a flashback. But it's like I kind of wanted there to be like, they wanted them to do Arwen justice and be like, she maybe is not the equivalent to in sense of like fighting ability, but she can have her stand. But when they didn't do that, I felt that they miss a trick.
Well,
and that was
sorry, I think the film does that more than the book, though, because in the book she only really appears at Rivendell, and then we don't see her again. And obviously that happens in the film. In this film, she comes back later on, but she is much more dynamic in saving the hobbits and things, because it's Elrond and Gandalf who call up the river in the book to block the ring wraiths, whereas it's Arwen who does in the film.
No, that's true, and but that's what I mean. It's like she does that. She does show her ability, but then it's kind of we never see it again, really. And that's what I felt was disappointing, is they've shown her maybe to start off as a warrior, so you get excited and go, oh, cracking, it's a great female character, and then it's just kind of nothing else, and she just looks sad the rest of the film, and the rest of the other two films, and you're like, oh, well, that's a bit of a disappointment, because as much as she only appears very briefly in the Fellowship, as in the book, I felt Peter Jackson could have used her a bit more to effect, that maybe she could, it could have been that maybe he even changed it a little bit, that maybe she accompanies them for a bit as like an extra person to guard Frodo, which I thought would have been great, but or like that she became like, she took over the guard at Rivendell and like protected her father and protected her city, and I felt that could have been great, because at least then it's showing that she is what sort of her ability sort of essentially from the book, but it's kind of like she has a sort of a great scene, and then that's kind of it, and I felt that was what was really disappointing about her.
And she becomes like Lady Ethereal Elf immediately afterwards, because she's in the white dress, and then they talk about the Even Star, and then basically for the rest of the films she's just a lady, in the most traditional sense, whereas later on when Éowyn comes in, she sort of becomes the warrior princess.
I felt she's kind of like, because we're jumping a bit, but in the sense of like for the series, like Éowyn was like started off as like sort of sort of meek, well, not meek, she was never meek, but like as you just kind of felt like she was going to be another Arwen, but she in the film she does sort of show that she's got that strength, and that's great, but but I would have liked it even for the Fellowship, just to show that Arwen was will continue to show that Arwen was a great female character.
I agree, but I think it's interesting as well. The Council of Elrond is a very interesting thing, because obviously the only people on there are men, and obviously that comes from the book, but it's curious how they decide to do it. It's much tenser, I feel, in the film. There's a lot more racial tension between the elves and the dwarves and everybody, and men.
Well, it's the discrimination, like even Gimli shows it towards Legolas.
Yeah.
Like it's he doesn't want to be associated with him,
Yeah.
and it's kind of it's like the essential a racial tension, I suppose, in Middle Earth.
Yeah, and I find it very interesting that people accuse Tolkien of being racist sometimes, because he talks about the tribes of the East and all this sort of stuff, and that there are accusations that the films are slightly racist as well later on. But it seems to me in the writing that he's actually poking fun at that, particularly early with the Bagginses and all of that sort of stuff. It's humorous.
Yeah.
And he's having a little jab.
It's kind of like they're sort of admitting, or sort of like, it's kind of as if the narrator, excuse me, is kind of explaining the bad points of that race, like be it the hobbits, be it the dwarves or something like that, and kind of sort of saying, yeah, they've got bad, but they're great in this. So it's kind of like everyone has a disadvantage. Like the dwarves are seen to be hot-headed and not really think before they go into battle. They kind of charge and see what happens.
Try and break the ring.
Yeah, basically, and then, like, the hobbits are seen as being, lazy and naive, but, they all do eventually grow to become, quite honourable characters, or that they've got a heart, and and they are, they're not cowards. They're cowards maybe at the start, but they grow to be strong characters. And it's the same with all of them. So I think that's what I think people do miss, especially in the books, because it's hard to sort of translate that really in the like, they do show their downfalls, but they're all sort of shown to be quite characters. But with especially with Tolkien's work, I can't, whenever someone says, oh, he's being very racist in the sense of that, terms of that, I don't think he is, because he does point out everyone has a flaw, but everyone has a strength, so it's kind of everyone's equal.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's interesting. That is particularly interesting because a lot of people have found fault with that, and it may be that I'm reading it from my perspective, and I sort of am trying to apologise for it, and but I just really don't feel it. I don't think it's there.
No.
But yeah, I think the council is more dramatic because obviously Gimli tries to break the ring. They're all arguing, and then Frodo has what I would count as a hero moment, rather than in the book when the ring is sort of forced upon him a little bit. He stands up and tries to shout above everybody else, "I'll take the ring."
Yeah, which I like, because considering, it's very out of character of a hobbit to do such a thing. Because I think he just kind of, would have been like, probably what Bilbo would have done originally as well, or any of them, which is just kind of just dropping it off and then we're back off for tea. Whereas, he does, like, the ring is kind of, he's just like, well, you're the only one that can carry it. None of us can carry it, so you have to do it in the books. And it's kind of he's begrudgingly essentially going on this quest. Whereas in the films, which they change, which I prefer from the books, is that he elects to go on it. He sort of channels that, probably that inner Took, sense, that he's going to be like, no, instead of just running away from my problems, or like, hiding from them, I'm going to accept it. I've come this far. I'm going to keep going. So I really think that's probably one of the main moments I actually really like Frodo, because he doesn't have many of those, but he has a few, and I think that's one of the great moments of Frodo, that he actually goes, yes, I'm a hobbit, but I'm not going to let that define me, and I'm going to prove to all of you who may doubt me that I can do it. And I think that's very brave.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic moment as well. It's really well shot, because it shows Gandalf's face when he hears Frodo saying, "I'll take the ring," and you just see his face fall. And Ian McKellen, just in case you haven't realised yet, we are massive fans of his, but it's just the way he just lets his face slowly drop, because he's just like, I knew he would do it, and I'm still sad about it.
It's kind of relief, and yet it's like a bittersweet moment, because he's like, he wants him to step up like Bilbo did and become like a great person that Bilbo did from the series and The Hobbit. But it's also it's a lot more of a dangerous mission than, well, it kind of is and it isn't, because obviously they were going up against a dragon in The Hobbit, but he's going up against Sauron, so this is like a big thing. So it's kind of like he's really happy that he's showing that sort of the strength that his uncle had and that his ancestors had, but also I think even he's a bit like, oh, I really kind of hope you didn't now, because now you have to do it, and you're going on, and there's no guarantee that I'm going to be there, because I've got to try and help. So I think what you mean, it's a great scene.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I mean, once they set off from Rivendell and they go on the different routes, that's very close to the book. They try and go over Karahadas, the mountain, but they change it from Karahadas's will in the book, that it's just throwing storms at them as if the mountain is alive,
Just casual.
into Saruman's magic, and you can hear his words on the wind and stuff. And in the film, Gimli suggests they go to Moria rather than Aragorn, and they also don't seem to know that Balin, Gimli's cousin, is dead. It seems that he just went there and disappeared, and they assume that he's fine and living it up.
Yeah, that was kind of one of those moments where it's like, then they find the crypt and
Yes.
and the last sort of account of what happened, and it's kind of, you know, I felt that because it's sort of that there's like the element of shock as to what has happened to the mines of Moria, but it's kind of it's not too much of a shock. They kind of expected that orcs had taken or goblins had taken it. You know, but the fact that they were just like, you know, in the film, he's just like, no, you know, Balin, you know, you're kind of like, but you kind of knew in the book, you kind of were aware of this.
Yeah, you've not heard from them in months. What did you expect? Yeah,
so it's kind of, it's that, you know, again, it's the differences. It's only tiny differences that maybe don't matter a lot, but it's kind of, we pick up on them because we've read the books, we're fans, and, you know, and we like going into it because that's what we do on the show. You know, we can't just kind of go, oh, you know, bits and pieces wrong, but, you know, that's that. But it's kind of like, it's the same for like Boromir, what we were saying, because we kind of have a bit of a discussion before, in the sense that Boromir doesn't die in the Fellowship of the Ring, he dies at the beginning of the Two Towers. But I feel that Peter Jackson did what I think J.R.R Tolkien should have done, which was, if he was going to die, he should have died at the end of the Fellowship, because it kind of closes that chapter so they can move on. As opposed to starting the Two Towers with a death. Yeah,
it marries the death of the Fellowship with the death of a character in the Fellowship, which I think thematically links up really well. And it is a bit strange that he just dies at the beginning of Two Towers.
Well, it's kind of, you know, they're all sort of essentially disbanded at the end of the Fellowship, so it would match it that the one of the Fellowship is dead, so it kind of it's kind of that omen for it that he dies and they all are separated.
Yeah, and it brings in the melancholia, and in the film they all know that Frodo's leaving as well, whereas in the book they all seem a bit confused, and then Frodo disappears and then Sam finds him and nearly drowns because Sam's an idiot.
Sam's amazing. I love Sam. Like, I think as much as he's a bit, you know, he fights for what he believes in, and he fights and he sticks to his guns, which I like.
Yes.
He's a bit bumbling in the book at the start, well, pretty much halfway through, but then I think he kind of finds his courage, and that's what I love about him.
Yeah, that is very true, and in the film it's presented very well, because when they meet Galadriel, she gives him a look.
Yeah.
And you know, that she's speaking to all of their minds. Galadriel is super creepy in the film. I find her really quite odd.
Yeah, like she's kind of, in the book she's kind of come across as like, she's very powerful but very sort of like quite, not sweet is the wrong word, but kind of like, you know, you'd get on with her. Like, she's there to be of help, whereas like in the films, you're kind of like, you don't know if she's friend or foe, you don't know if she's on your side or she's going to betray you, which I don't know if I like. I think, you know, I think it's good that she's kind of, she's this character who we don't know if we can trust, but in the book it's very different. You kind of know she's a friend, and that's it. But in this, it's kind of, you know, they're in the middle of the wood, and as much as it's stunning in that, we don't know who she is, and she comes across as very aloof and flaky. So I don't know if I like that. I don't know if it's like, it's that element of, you know, she's so powerful that she can't be a friend or foe. She's kind of a bit of both.
Yeah, and I find the weird like whispers that she gives to their minds and things in the film, they're really creepy. I think it's maybe just how Cate Blanchett read them, but it's the thing, it's like, who's seen the eye, and she does that weird face, and it takes me out of Galadriel a little bit, and I really like her in the book because I find her one of those really ethereal characters who isn't quite all there in the moment, because you get the sense that, and she says this in the film when she passes the test, when Frodo offers her the ring and she refuses, she says, I passed the test and I will continue to fade. And it's the idea that actually half of her is probably already over the Grey Havens, is already across the sea, as a lot of the elves already are. And I really like that as part of her character, that this part of the world is dwindling. They know it is, and they're sad about it, but they accept it. And they accept that they can still fight, and that perhaps the age of men needs to come.
Yeah, which I think, I think it is done well, and I think the scene with Lady Galadriel it's a very, I've still got a question mark over that scene in the sense with the book, because it's kind of it's I thought Kate Blanchett was a fantastic choice because I've seen her in Elizabeth as Queen Elizabeth, so she's got that sense of she can dominate the screen, and she can dominate in a role of a strong woman. But it's kind of, she doesn't shout in the sense of like, yes, she has that scene, but that's when she's being she's fighting the urge to take the ring. So it's like, yes, she is having that strange sort of moment really where she's like fighting herself, and so yes, there is she's shouting and screaming, but she's turning blue, which is a bit odd. But her a general sort of like, she's not one to get angry. She's not one to. She's very neutral, which I think is what kind of they wanted to make her, is like she's a neutral character. So not that she's going to betray them or that she's going to help Sauron or she owes allegiance to Sauron, but in the sense that she can only help them in so much way. Like she couldn't be like, oh yeah, I'm going to take you there, or like I'll give you weapons, or this. She kind of has to sort of teach them to carry them on, so they have to learn themselves. So I think that's kind of what, to me, is why it kind of, I'm in a question mark about it, because she's a neutral character, and it's kind of, it's different from, they kind of make her more of a friend in the Fellowship in the book, as opposed to in the film where they make her a neutral character. So I think that's what's interesting about it.
In the film, she gives them, she gives Frodo the light.
Yeah.
But in the book, she gives them a few more presents and things on a nice little picnic as they're going away from LOTR, which I sort of, in the book, it kind of feels like an afterthought from Tolkien, where he's gone, oh, they need these things, so I shall edit in this picnic. This is because they've already left.
I'll just add a picnic into it, like, okay.
Which is lovely, but it's a bit odd. But no, I think, and going back to Sam as well, he is, as we learn later, he sort of becomes a lot more heroic and things, and we, he is very attached to things. I mean, I love one of the little sort of fan shout-outs that they have is before they go into Moria, they send Bill the pony away, which I think is lovely because he features a lot more in the book, and he's very loyal to them. He's come from Farmer Maggot's farm, and he goes all the way to Moria. But it's just a little throwaway thing. It's actually not very good storytelling in the film for them to have this random pony that Sam's upset about.
It's that element of, it's the smallest details are the one that mean a lot to you, and it's like, I suppose, maybe if they'd brought the pony along, people might have realised that they'd had him since the beginning, but maybe a lot of people wouldn't have, so they wouldn't have got why he's upset. Whereas in the book, it's kind of like, they do keep that element of like, this pony's followed them all the way, and then now, safety, they turn away, and Sam's sad, and it's kind of like, you get that feeling that like, the pony's like, I don't want to go, I want to stay and help. But it's like, it's really sweet, and I think it's a lot of that is the smallest elements and the smallest sort of parts are essentially sort of have more meaning. So, which I think is easy to do in a book and difficult to do in a film, because in the film you've got to look at like essentially, and I'm not trying to make a pun here, but the whole picture. You've got to think of like running time. You've got to think of, does it all make sense? Because at the end of the day, as true as you want to make it, it's got to run and be fluid, and which it does. I think it's it runs fantastically, and it doesn't stop start like the book does.
I think if I have a problem with the film in the way that it does things, the ending does take a long time. I'd forgotten particularly with Fellowship, because Return of the King has like 73 endings, even in the non-extended cut. It's kind of a tradition with these films, is that actually there's a lot of endings, so it feels like it should go, when Boromir dies, it feels like it should end, but then you see the Sam and Frodo bit and they're heading off on their own, and it's just, and Aragorn sends Frodo away, and all that, and it plods a little bit just right at the end as they're setting up what's going on for Two Towers, whereas they could do it quite quickly, and then Sam nearly drowns and it takes ages for Frodo to pull him out of the water, and I kind of feel like Peter Jackson just gave up on editing.
I think it's kind of, that's the sloppiest part of the film, is just the ending, because I think they obviously had the ways in which they were going to finish it and like end each person's road in that film to like build it up for the next one, but I do feel it just kind of, as opposed to just being like, right, this is what's happening and go, they're just kind of, right, this is what's happening, we're going to sort of meander for a bit. So I think that's because at least with the book, it kind of sort of really goes like, right, this is what's happening, and that's how it ends. And you go, great, okay, now I know where to pick up from next, which the book next picks up from. But the film, it kind of just sort of meanders. It kind of doesn't. It's like it doesn't want to finish. It's just kind of like, no, but we could put more in, and you're like, no, just end it. Just end it here, because this is where it's perfect. So again, it's like that's where the difference is. Where the book's better than the film, and there's elements where the film's better than the book. So it's difficult, but I do think out of all of it, that's the element that it struggled on, just ending the film, because it should have just stopped, but it didn't.
Yeah, because and as we've mentioned, the Boromir death feels more conclusive.
Yeah.
Yet it continues after that, because it's a really lovely moment when Boromir says, my king, to Aragorn. He's finally accepted that. He's accepted that he failed, that he drove Frodo away, and he's become a better person right at the end. But you kind of feel like when it then continues, it wastes the conclusion that gave us, and you then question, well, why did they move it from the beginning of Two Towers then, if they were just going to waste it on not using it as the ending?
Yeah, like if they'd done that conclusion, he dies and says, my king, and then it just is like, they're going like, well, where's Frodo? And it's just them walking, being like,
shows them on the boat.
Yeah, or shows them on the boat being like, or just like, and then it just like, I don't know, Sam being like, where are we off to, Mr. Frodo? And he's like, to finish our adventure, something like that. That would have been poignant, because
or even like actually thinking about it, if someone asked, like one of the hobbits, for example, although they're kidnapped, or our Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli, when they go off, if one of them asks, well, where's Frodo, and literally it does a voiceover as Frodo and Sam are just travelling away on the boat, that would be a really cool scene to end it on, and then Frodo and Sam, like, they don't have to talk. It just shows that actually Sam, and it could show Sam finding Frodo, that's fine, because you're doing the show, not tell, but it just shows that they're drifting off and drifting away, and then it could close, and that would be a really nice closing thing, as opposed to the weird drowning moment where Sam's like, I can't swim, and you're like, well, why are you in the water?
It sort of felt very clumsy how it ended, so that was a bit of a disappointment. But so it's the big moment. What do you prefer? Is it the film or is it the book? What did you feel you preferred or you liked?
This is so difficult.
It's really
this is really hard, and I apologise that we've gone over an hour. I was really hoping we wouldn't, but hey, it's Lord of the Rings, so sue us.
Trust us to be doing Lord of the Rings, where it's the longest one we've done.
Apart from True Crime, that was stupidly long. But I really don't know. This is really tough. There are lots of compelling reasons that I like either or. And it sounds really hypocritical after just saying that it's not economical in its ending, but it's economical everywhere else. Yeah. So I'm gonna say I think the film's better.
See, I really don't know what to do, because I was like, it's so difficult, because the film speaks so much more to me, because it's you see it all, and you see the stunning landscapes, you see Rivendell, you see Lothlorien, you see Mordor, and Hobbiton. But unfortunately I'm gonna have to go with the book, because I think it's one of those that, like, I've always had it in my bookcase, I've always had it. I read it, as much as it does have moments where you're like, okay, it's been 4 chapters of the genealogy, please move on. It's one of those that you just can't forget. So yeah, I think it's going to be the book for me. So it's split down the middle. It's we split down the middle. So yeah, well, that was a bit of an epic. But thank you very much for joining us again today. Next week we'll be doing, I believe it's Game of Thrones.
Yes, season 1, book 1, because we can't do all of it because it's not finished. Yeah,
we're going to kind of do what we've done here, where we're going to separate it out, because we're about 4 episodes into season 6, which is very exciting. It's getting very good at the moment, which we're really looking forward to. And also because there's the new sort of like excerpt of The Winds of Winter has been released. So it's all getting very exciting in the sense of the Game of Thrones, and we are big fans of Game of Thrones. So it'll be episode, well, not episode, that will be the next episode, excuse me. But it's going to be season 1 of Game of Thrones compared to book 1, which is Game of Thrones. So we're going to do it that way, and then maybe another time we'll do season 2 and then Clash of Kings and so on and so forth. But so that's going to be the next time on Morlock Me. But as always, do comment on the video or leave us a comment on Twitter. We're at Morlock Me. Don't forget to suggest any sort of books and their cinematic adaptations to us, because we're always looking for suggestions. Remember to use the hashtags the film were better or the book was better, of what you think, even for anything we've discussed previously, or anything that you think maybe we should do, so then we can get an idea of what people want to think. But for now, I think we'll say au revoir, as they say in France, and we'll see you next time.
Bye. Oh, yeah, we're going to do lots of endings because it's traditional. So if you want to like and subscribe, please do. I'm now going to pass the microphone back to Charlie. She might edit this and it might be terrible, but I'm just going to make her say goodbye again.
No, I think that was very well done, because those things I forgot. See, I can't do the show without you. So until next time, we'll see you soon. So bye-bye.